we're continuing in Halacha Zayin, Pe'af Halacha Zayin. The Ramah says, we have been talking, the halacha was about milk from a human, and now the Ramah says like this, Chalav Mitris, Chalav Yisraelis. The din is that a chalav from a not Jewish lady is exactly the same as chalav from a Jewish lady. If you have a choice, a child shouldn't nurse from a not Jewish lady. The chalav Timtum Halev because nursing from this shiksa is Timtum Halev and brings a tevara. Even if you're going to use a Jewish nurse, she should never eat dvar masum. So everybody explains means is if she's in the Sakanah, she shouldn't eat dvar masum and then nurse the baby if you have a choice. Also, the tinnik itself shouldn't eat isur, which means is by issurim drabanan, there's no mitzvah for the people to stop him from eating isur. There's technically no isur. But if he does eat the isur, it'll hurt him because he calls it mazik like this. So it'll affect him later on. So even though the din doesn't require them to stop him from eating it under the right circumstances, but still they should stop him from eating it because of this Timtum Halev. Okay, and really I read the din here, but really the understanding of what the Ramah says, and we'll get a bunch of cases and where the cases come from, is really more for next time. This time we're going to talk about some preparation for that. Okay?
It's clear that you shouldn't let the kid eat. Yeah, that's what
the Shach says. Yeah. Okay, because it's a Gemara, because if it's a certain right, so you can't let him eat, you're not allowed to let him eat. Here it's saying this, Minhadin, you'd be allowed to let him eat, so to speak, you'd be allowed to let him eat, but because of the Timtum Halev, if we don't let him eat, if I'm reading that correctly.
That's not, I thought it was
Klaimar, Afagab the Katan Echad Ram Hasurim Midrabanan, Ein of Mitzvah Lafrisha, the Ramin the Shach, Kamoshim Vur Narchaim, the Kamakam, you should stop it because of the Timtum Halev. So the first part I'm going to talk about is the Pri Chodesh says like this. He's medayik that the Ramah says. The Ramah start off this section by saying Chalav Mitzvahs Chalav Yisraelis. They're on equal footing. Chalav from Mitzvahs and Yisraelis are on equal footing. Except there's this issue that we're going to talk about, this Timtum Halev. The Pri Chodesh says it's wrong. He says it's not true. He says the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says in Yavam says, I'll read you the Gemara. It says Yonik Tinik B'Hoilach Me'evedes Kechavim U'Behemet Tmeah. A child can nurse from a guy or from a treif animal. The Ein Choshishim B'Yonik Shekets. We're not Choshishim because he does it by himself. So the first part is nursing from a mitzvah from an Aved's Kechavim is not a problem. There's nothing wrong with that. From a Behemet Tmeah is not a problem because he's doing it by himself. But you can't do it b'yadayim. You can't feed him b'yadayim. That's issur to feed him. All the things he's allowed to nurse, he could do it on Shabbos because you don't have to be choshesh for what he's being mefarik. And all this thing is also for a gadol. So the Pri Chodesh says the Gemara equated nursing from a levelis kechavim and from a behemet tmeah, and it said for the child it's mutter, and for the gadol it's asur. So the Gemara is saying is that it's asur for a gadol to take milk from a guy. Just like you can take from a trained animal, that was the whole sin was about that. You can't take from a not Jewish lady either. That's an isser. So he says. So it's not true what the Ramah says that chalav mitzvahs chalav Yisraelis. For a child it is, but for an adult it's not. And what he says. So let me just tell you two questions that he asked before to understand what he says. He says, wait a second, I'm telling you that this Gemara in Yevamis is saying that there's an isser to eat Chalav Nachris. Okay, which he calls it Chalav Akum. It's just funny. Where he calls it Chalav Akum. The Ramah had a nicer way to call it Chalav. Everybody else calls it Chalav Nachris, then he calls it Chalav Akum, okay? He was in a different sin. He calls it Chalav Akum. But anyhow, we'll call it Chalav Nachris. So he says, how can I tell you that it's also to eat Chalav Nachris? He says, when we keep talking about the Gemara in Ksubas, which is based on, that says is Chalav Mahalchei Shnaim is mutter. Chalav from humans is mutter. So how can you tell me that this Gemara says it's also? So he says, the Gemara says Chalav Mahalchei Shnaim is mutter, that's midraisa. The Gemara in Yevamis that says Chalav Nachris is asur, that's midrabanan. So it's issur drabanan. He says, okay, so it's issur drabanan. He says, wait a second, there's another Gemara. The Gemara says in Avodah Zarah, the Gemara talks about the safety issues of letting not Jewish lady nurse a baby. Okay, a yichud, to let the not Jewish lady nurse the baby. The Gemara talks about the safety, what you have to do to make sure about that. And the Gemara, and there's the Medrash says, which is sort of what the Ramah is based on, that Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't nurse from the mitzvahs, but that was like a milah for Moshe Rabbeinu, because Pesha also Davin Hashchina wouldn't nurse from the mitzvahs, but everybody else can. He says, how can I tell you? excuse me, it's Asum Darbanim, when there's two other things that tell me that there's no Issa to it at all. So he says the Issa Darbanim is only for adults. Okay, and which is what the Gemara says, Begadol Asur, that's also for adults, but for children there's no Issa Darbanim. So Midraisa, it's completely mutter. For Midrabanan, it's Asur for adults and mutter for children. That's what Brit Chodesh says. So that's how he learns, and the Daki Tshuva brings from Machan Ephraim. He says, I'm not convinced that the Ramah is arguing really on what he says. Because listen to what he said. The Gemara says in Yevamos that Begadol Asur to be essentially Gadol Asur to be yearning for a Vedis Kecham. So he says maybe all the Ramah thinks that Gemara just means is not that it's Asur, Mamish Asur, like underlined, officially forbidden. It means it's like not recommended. It's that because it causes Timtum. But the Ramah says that of it causing Timtum, the later words of the Ramah, maybe that's how he understood what the Gemara says in Yevamos. The Ramah says Chalav Mitzvahs Kechalav Yisraelis means min hadin, like in the din technically it's mutter, but there's all kinds of Timtum that comes from that. Maybe that's all the Ramah meant by that. He didn't mean, maybe he learns that the Gemara just means not that it's Asur per se, the Prichot is saying it's Asur, Mamish it's Asur. And the Ramah just says that doesn't mean Asur, it means just that's like not recommended, so to speak.
Yeah, this is also an Achash Pirish from Isha, right? It's not talking about the record.
Yeah, of course it's Achash Pirish. Yeah, because that's the beginning of the thing. That straight from the Isha it was Asur for a different reason. Okay, so now, the Gemara does use the word Gadol Asur, but it's not really a question on the Ramah. The Gemara uses the word Chalav Asur because you remember the Gemara said, listen to all the cases the Gemara said, what that a teen could do. He could be yearning for a behemoth Tmeah, he could yearning for Shabbos. Okay, so when the Gemara says at the end, it's Gadol Asur, it's going back in all those cases. A whole bunch of them are really Asur for a Gadol. It's really Asur for a Gadol to squeeze milk out on Shabbos from a cow, and it's really Asur to drink milk from a camel. Okay, and so one of the cases which Moededes Kechon is not so Asur, it's not fully Asur. So maybe the Gemara is not being so dafka, and that's how I'm seeing the Gemara like that. Okay, and another thing is that according to the way the Pri Chodesh is learning, well, let me say this. If you think the Gemara in Yevamos means that literally, that it's Mamish Begadol Asur, it's Asur to have Chalav Mitzvahs, how come that din is not in Shulchan Aruch? How come the Mechaber didn't bring the din, it's a Gemara, it says Begadol Asur. How come he doesn't bring that din, that it's Asur, we had the beginning of the sin was that you can't eat from Behemoth Tmeah, and some in Hilchos Shabbos it says you can't, squeeze milk out of a cow. Why doesn't it say that you're not allowed to take from a Vedis Kechon? So the Pasha says the answer is, the reason is because the Shulchan Aruch only wants to tell you what the din is. What are you allowed and not allowed to do? And the things that are more mystical, the Timtum Halev, it's not the din, that doesn't fit in the Shulchan Aruch. There's a different kind of a sefer for that. But the Shulchan Aruch didn't feel like, and the Ramah decided he wanted to mention that thing.
But why is it only a Vedis Kechavim? Why can't it be any non-Jew?
That's what it means. It means
Is that what it means? It doesn't sound to me like that.
We'll talk about it next time. Okay, we'll talk about it next time. What it means. Pashas it means from anyway. We'll talk about it next time. Okay. You could argue that it only meant Vedis Kechavim. We'll talk about it next time. There's what to talk about. That. Okay. Anyhow, let's move on. Okay. Now I have to just mention something. What we're going to do now is sort of prepare ourselves for next time. Okay, because next time we're going to talk about a shayla that came up. It's come up at different times, but unfortunately came up very seriously in recent years, which was after the people in Muncie ended up eating treif food, because there was this person who was Shem Shabbos, and he had a hashgacha in his store, was serving treif food to people that was not kosher. And so the shayla came up there of whether that eating of that food caused those people Timtum Halev. Okay? That's really what we're going to talk about next time. But today we're going to do some introductions to that to get us prepared to push some questions out of the way before we really get to the shayla next time. Okay? And in talking about that, not really. I'll just tell you, the Mitzvah Rebbe once spoke for Aruch, a year ago, and he said that what Timtum Halev means, if you're trying to understand it, I don't know if you're going to understand it, if we're going to try to understand it, means is that by a yid, his guf and neshama are attached to each other. They're not like independent beings, they're attached to each other. And therefore it's possible that if I eat something physical that I'm not supposed to have, I'm not supposed to eat whatever this issue that I'm not supposed to have, that affects my neshama, and means my neshama cannot connect to ruchnius in the way that it used to be able to do. And so Timtum Halev means is, my lev over here means the neshama part of me, the spiritual part of me is the connection between me and whatever, ruchnius I'm supposed to have gets stuffed up by eating my things that are issurim. Okay, that's what we
I think
say.
the lev means the das, the knowledge.
Okay.
In general, we have misconception. We think that lev is emotions, but if you look into all psukim and the Torah, label of das and everything like that, that means that your thought process is not
Okay.
smooth.
Okay, I'll go for that. That's fine. Okay, so now, two things that I think that are correct. You'll argue if you think I'm wrong. That I think are correct like this. The first thing is, if we have a shiloh, whether someone should do something that they have to do, they have to eat an isser. Let's say the case in our din here. The lady was nursing, and she has to eat isser. Okay? So, I'm not talking about whether she should nurse the baby afterwards, but she has to eat isser. Because she's in a sakanah, she has to eat isser. Okay? So she says, well, on the one hand, I'm in a sakanah, and I have to eat isser. And on the other hand, if I eat the isser, it's going to cause Timtum Halev. Okay? So, should she do it, or should she not do it? Okay. At that point, she has to decide. I'm not talking whether she should nurse the baby afterwards. Should she eat the isser? Should she not eat the isser? So to me, it seems clear that Timtum Halev is a secondary consideration. The din is the first thing. The first thing is the din. The din is, if you're in a sakanah and this is going to help you, then you have to eat it. The second thing is, well, if I had a way to avoid it, could I avoid it and to avoid Timtum? Timtum is like a nice thing to get afterwards, but that's not the ikar.
Differentiate between the rice and rabbanan.
What do you mean?
Because we say in general that a rice is the chevtza.
So that's what Yossi was hinting at before him, and it's a possibility. It's a shach based on the shach. It may not be true. The shach is implying that Timtum even happens from Yisroel and Rabbanan. Okay, and a little bit we'll talk about it next time. I'm not sure if we're going to, but maybe. But the shach, here the lady is eating isser. Whatever the issue was, it was a kind that causes Timtum. So she's not supposed to nurse the baby. But what about she herself? When she's eating it, does the Timtum play a role in whether she should eat the food or not? Okay? So, you might want it to. You might say, no, I'm not going to eat because of the Timtum, but l'chara, that's a foolish decision. Because the din is that you're supposed to eat it. In Makam Sakanah, you're allowed to, and you're supposed to eat the answer. So that's what you should do. So the fact that there's a Timtum is unfortunate, but the Timtum is only a secondary consideration. And I say it because, to me, it seems pretty straightforward, because people are going to try to bring a riot to this shaila about what the people should do in Muncie from a din. There's a din in Hilchos Shabbos that says what happens if you have a person who's sick and he needs to eat a piece of meat, and you have a choice. You give him the nevela, or you could shech the animal for him. Okay, there's a shaila which one you should do. Should you shech the animal, or should you give him a nevela? Okay, and the din is you're supposed to shech to him. Okay, so there are some people who say they want to see from that din that you should shech to him that you should avoid that there's Timtum Halev. You should avoid the Timtum because that's why if you shech the animal, it's a kosher animal. If you give him treif, the animal, of course, is treif. So shechting the animal is a way of avoiding his Timtum Halev, and that's why you should prefer this over that. That's why you prefer the shechting over the veil. And to me, that doesn't sound like a riot at all. It doesn't make any sense because there's a din. First, we have to think about the din before we think about the Timtum. What's the din? Should you prefer the shechita, or you should prefer the nevel? If they were completely equal, then you say, I care the Timtum Halev, I want to avoid that. But they're not completely equal. There's all kinds of reasons why there's advantages to each one of them. We want to give the price we give the shchuta to him first because it's only one isser. Okay, we give the shchuta first because if we give him the veil, he won't want to eat it, so you're not going to help the guy. It has nothing to do with the din. Others say that shchita maybe is hutra and eating the veil is the chuya. Okay, there are halachic considerations in deciding which one to give, and they're stubborn to give the other way also. But we can't think about the Timtum Shaila until we first talk about the din. First we have to talk about what's the din. Is this preferable, this preferable? The Timtum doesn't weigh in on that first decision. Once we got past the first, if it will be mamish equal, then the secondary consideration is, okay, well, which one's going to cause Timtum? But the decision is not about that. The decision to give him the shchuta is not because we're avoiding Timtum. Okay, unless we came to a mamish standstill, then we would let that decide. But on the surface, there are other ways to figure out which it is, which is all the person can say. They don't give the reason because we're trying to avoid Timtum. So there are a who say that, but I don't really understand. Okay, the one case I can think of by Sakanah where Timtum would play a role is that there's a din. Not everybody agrees to this, but the Mechaber says that if a person is in Sakanah, there's also Hilchos Shabbos. If a person, same thing. If a person's in Sakanah, then you could do oisin called tzarchi chayla. Okay, that means you're not only allowed to do for the chayla the things that will cure his sickness. You could do everything that you usually do for the chayla, even though it involves issurim. Even though you're doing issurim, that issurim have nothing to do with helping him. You're still allowed to do them. Not everybody agrees. But that's what the Mechaber said. Oisin called tzarchi chayla b'Shabbos. So when you're doing kol tzarchi chayla for Shabbos, and so then you might say should I eat this thing which is going to cause Timtum? Maybe that you wouldn't do. Maybe then you would say listen, I don't have to eat this. It's not like if I don't eat this, I'm going to be sick from that. This is just the bonus. This is just general way you take care of a person. So maybe at that point you'd say avoid that food. Then I could hear that. But in the real decision, should I give him shchuta? Should I give him nevela? I don't hear that over there. That the Timtum plays a role. Okay. And the next thing is that it seems to me that you could only think about Timtum coming from eating issurim if you do the issurim, if you do the issur the way the Torah said. Okay? What I mean, I don't mean that you did it without permission. That could be next time. What happens if you had Rishus, it was a Shem Shabbos, and he told you the food was kosher? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about you did the issur itself. Like, for example, I have a few examples. In Simon Peidal, we spoke about, Tracy placed the Kashrus like this. He says, bugs are not berries. He says, I don't think bugs are berries, because the din is, and a bug is not usher until it's sheretz al haaretz. Well, many bugs are not usher until the sheretz al haaretz. That means is when it was born, it wasn't usher. It only became usher a second later when it took its first steps. Okay, so one of the rules of a beria is something's only a beria if it's usher mitchilas briyasai. So bugs were not usher mitchilas briyasai because when they were born, they were mutter. A second later, they became usher. So they're not usher mitchilas briyasai, they're usher from a second later. Okay, we talked about this in the beginning of Peidal and why many disagree with it. I mean, everybody disagrees with it. Okay, and what the reasons are to disagree. But Prim Godim's reason to disagree is like this. He says is, when the bug was born, and it hadn't yet been sheretz al haaretz, he says, that's not a bug yet. He says, that's a piece of vegetable. At that point, we look at it as an extension of the vegetable, and that's why it's mutter. When it's sheretz al haaretz, now the Torah told us that it's a bug, and therefore it's mutter. So Rabbi Yisrael just said. So he said, so there's no Timtum either. It's a vegetable. Until it's sheretz, it's a vegetable. When it's sheretz, it becomes a bug, and so it's asher mitchilas briyasai from the beginning of becoming a bug. Now to us, that's really strange. It's the same bug a second before as a second after. What's the difference? When it started walking, didn't make it a bug. But the Torah is telling us that we should view it as a bug. When it's sheretz, now it's a bug. Before it was sheretz, it's not a bug. And therefore, it's asher mitchilas briyasai from when it first became a bug, it became asher, and it wouldn't make Timtum either. Because if I ate it before it was sheretz, but if I ate a bug before it was sheretz, I didn't eat an isser that I had permission to eat. I didn't eat an isser at all. I ate something that was totally nothing. I ate a piece of vegetable. What?
Who says that with the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch and everybody says this bug is mutter, it's not sheretz? Who said it is mitamtum?
It's not mitamtum.
Just that it is. Who's he trying to from who?
No, I'm trying to make a point. No, it's not mitamtum. I'm making a point is the reason why it's not mitamtum is because even though the bug is the same bug a second before and a second after, but if we treat it as a vegetable beforehand, then why should we?
It's very long. It's a hutter. It's partial mutter. You say shchita, you say they shecht an animal, maybe it's not mitamtum. It's not telling you it's not mitamtum because before it was also now I shechted. It's mutter. Is it a heter?
So you're saying the fact that the Torah was said you're allowed to eat it beforehand.
Sure.
So okay. You can take that one. I can hear you. I can take that. Okay. So
who argues?
All that I'm saying here, you'll say the same thing also. Except, okay, yes, you could say the same. You could say your way. I don't take that. Okay. My next case is what happens if you eat something that's not royal achil anymore? Okay. You take something that's not royal achil that the din is that it's mutter. Okay. So you're not doing it. You could say justice. You could say take it his way. Same thing. The point is, when I'm eating the thing now, although isser is going into my body, I'll take the isser is getting in, but it's not isser. No, it's not isser anymore. It's not isser in the form the Torah said I shouldn't eat it, so I'm allowed to eat that.
Okay. Deal with this Rabbanan.
What did you say?
If it's awesome the Rabbanan,
I'm not talking about this Rabbanan. It's mutter completely. When it comes mutter. Okay. And the last is, what happens if a person takes this one may not fit for us, maybe. What happens if a person gets a transfusion? Okay, he gets a transfusion from blood from someone who's not Jewish, or someone who ate Isser. Okay, so the Ramah talked about nursing, and then we have it did tells us based on this Gemara that the Timtum can pass through. What if I take a transfusion from somebody who eats Isser? Okay, does that cause Timtum to me? If I'm taking his blood, does that cause a Timtum to me? So there's no Isser there's no Isser to eat food through your veins. The Isser is to swallow food. It's not an Isser per se to get trace. If you stick chazer into my veins, that's not an Isser. So I'm not doing the act of doing the Isser at all. All I'm doing is it's coming into my body. Now you say to me, wait a second, he says, if it causes Timtum when you swallow it, then of course it's going to cause Timtum if you inject it right into your body. I mean, somehow it seems like much more like right in there than if you swallow it. So to that I say, you probably remember, I think we've talked about this. Rav Moshe has a tshuva about eggs and onions that are kept overnight. Okay, and Rav Moshe says, the Gemara says you can't keep eggs and onions and garlic that are peeled overnight, and it causes ruach ra if you do that. So Rav Moshe says, well, what the Gemara was talking about, what would be typical in their days, which is you slice an onion and you use it tomorrow, the next day. I mean, how many days will it last? In the times of going, how many days will it last? He says, but if you take it and you process it in a way that it's meant to last a long time, like you make peeled hard-boiled eggs. Okay, you make hard-boiled eggs, they peel them, and it lasts for 6 weeks afterwards. Okay, or you make something that lasts for months on end. He says, there's no ruach. Well, that's not the case of what I was talking about. So he says, I know what your question. He says, I know what you're going to ask me. He says, you're going to ask me, wait a second, if it causes ruach ra to be out overnight one night, Koloshkin should make ruach ra if it's out for 6 weeks. To you, that's like, obviously, if the Gemara says don't keep it for one night, why is it better if you keep it for 6 weeks? To which Rav Moshe says, he says, you can only ask that kind of a question because that question is a Koloshkin. Well, that's because you think you understand it. You think if it's one night is bad, let's think about like germs-wise. If one night would cause the eggs to spoil and get salmonella, then 6 weeks would cause even more. He says, well, that's a logic. You understand the first thing, and therefore you're saying, and therefore I can extend it to another case. He says, we don't know what this is talking about. We don't know what ruach ra is. So we don't know what ruach ra is, so maybe in one night is ruach ra, and 6 weeks is not ruach ra. How do you know? He says, well, you can't make kosher cane unless you understand what you're talking about. So, the same thing here also is that, to us, logically, you say, if I swallow the isser, it causes Timtum Halev. If I inject it into my veins, maybe it should make it worse. Who said? Well, Dafka works like that. We don't know how these things work. Like we said by the homeopathic things. He says, there's poisons, poisons are only dangerous if you swallow them. They're not dangerous if you inject them. And venoms are the other way around. Venoms are only dangerous if they go into your skin, not if you swallow them. In other words, not everything works so logically that if it's dangerous this way, it's dangerous the other. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't go Timtum Halev. If there's no isser to do it, this is sort of like yesterday. If there's no isser to do it, then there's no Timtum. I have no basis for saying that there is a Timtum Halev. Okay? And I'm mentioning this last case. I'm sorry, that I thought it was interesting. I mentioned the last case in light of, you all heard of this, you probably heard. Hashgacha recently just gave Hashgacha, a national Hashgacha, on intravenous drip that people take, some kind of medicinal item that people take. And so what we're saying is that there wouldn't be a basis, for sure not a halachic basis, and maybe not, seemingly not even a Timtum Halev reason to avoid it if it would be isser. That's from the side of the is it right or wrong? Do you need the Hashgacha? And the other side, which has nothing to do with what we're doing, which is that they're taking a very dangerous step. When they say is, my injection is certified kosher, is saying to me, as if to imply the next injection, the next thing you're taking, is not as good as mine because it doesn't have hashgacha. Well, what most people are taking things intravenously are not taking it because, to make their hair shiny. They're taking it because there's a sakanah. Most people take these kind of things for serious conditions, and it's discouraging people from taking those things, which seems like a very dangerous idea. You have to tell people, mine is kosher, but yours is not. I remember hearing that once from the Eidah Charedis. Does it want to give hashgacha on medicinal items because that would imply to people, the ones that we're not giving hashgacha to are not acceptable, and you shouldn't take it. Which would be
cleansers.
What do you say?
Same thing with cleansers.
With cleanser? Well, what's the downside? So they won't use a cleanser. So the toilet won't be as clean. Who cares? But over here, the guy's not going to take his heart medicine. So there's a big downside.
Even if it would cause Timtum Halev, it could be a svara not to give hashgachos to things that are medicinal, that are really, really necessary.
Because they're very important. Right? 'Cause it implies
that's independent of the
yes.
Timtum Halev
Yes.
consideration.
Yeah. It has nothing to do with him. I'm just mentioning it. Saying this one is kosher implies that one is not as good as this one. Which the idea is someone's going to say, "So I won't take that one." But that's really foolish choice. Yeah, nothing to do with Timtum. Nothing to do with Timtum. The Timtum part of it is the din part of it, which is there any basis for thinking that should need hashgacha? Is there any basis? Let's say it wouldn't be for a Sakanah reason. It would be for something just simple. Well, harder there wouldn't be. Okay. Now to another child.
Is the problem of a Chalav Nachris because she eats the Chalav Nachris?
Tomorrow, next time we'll talk about that. Okay. The simple if you just read the Ramah, you think it's because she eats Chalav. That's not the truth. We'll talk about it next time. Okay. We'll talk about it next time.
You're not committed if you get a kosher diet.
Right. We'll talk about it next time. Next chapter next time. Okay. Okay. So the last thing to talk about is when we talk about Timtum Halev from eating these different issurim. Does that apply to issurim that are not inherent issurim, but they're time-bound issurim? Yeah, issur that today it's mutter and tomorrow it's asur. Okay. We'll talk about the case we're going to talk about is eating in Yom Kippur. If I eat chazer, that goes Timtum Halev. What else if I eat on Yom Kippur? Okay. So there's nothing inherent to the food that I'm eating. I'm eating kosher potato chips. There's nothing inherently treif about it, but there's an issue to eat it today. Right now, I'm not like, is there a Timtum Halev or not?
Okay. The Gemara talks about Timtum.
That's next time. Yes, that's a good question. We'll talk about that next time. I know it because it's an obvious question. Okay, it's an obvious question. The Gemara doesn't say that Machalos Asurus was Timtum. The Gemara says Aver Mitam Tam. So that's gonna be next time. Next time we'll talk about that. Okay, that's 100%. Okay, but blind as we are looking at the din over here, we just assume that has to do with Machalos Asurus. Okay, so the Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein brings a machlokes about this, whether time-bound issurim cause Timtum, the Sefer is Mekel, and the Aruch is Machmir. And so I want to talk about the Aruch is Raya. Okay, and L'chayra, at first glance, it's a very strong Raya that there's Timtum Halev from eating from these time-bound issurim. The Gemara says in Yuma, Pei, Beis, and Beis, Pei, Gimel, and Alf, the Gemara talks about if a lady who's pregnant wants to eat on Yom Kippur, okay, she smells food and she wants to eat it. So the Gemara says, you should try to convince her to not eat it. You should try to convince her to not eat it. And the Gemara then says stories about ladies who were or were not convinced. The Gemara brings the stories over here. And if you can't convince her, then she's allowed to eat it. Because if she wants it, it's considered Sakanah. But ladies who didn't eat it, and then tells you about what their children were like. And the ones who listened had good children, and the ones who ate the food, had children that were not so great. And so the Gemara tells you, so the impression is, because the lady ate on Yom Kippur, that caused the child, that was affected the child. The child was therefore better or worse off whether she ate on Yom Kippur or she didn't eat. Okay? So the Aruch brings it right from here. That you see that even though it's a time-bound issue, if you're just eating Yom Kippur, you see that causes the Timtum. Okay? So the reason, it seems like it's straightforward enough and strong enough, right? So the reason to argue is an interesting Rashi. That's why I put the Gemara here. Interesting Rashi. The Gemara says you should whisper to the person. You should whisper to her. Yes.
I don't know. As far as Pasha the Gemara, remember the Gemara is that he was a Rusher from the womb that he didn't listen.
Your mamish
he didn't listen because he was a Rusher from.
So Rashi says that's what I'm saying. Yeah, no, you're a Navi today. Okay. So Rashi says like this. Listen what Rashi says. Kibla es halachisha. She accepted the whispering to her. In other words, you said to her, it would be better, you should really try it in Kippur, it's good for you, I don't know what you're supposed to say to her. And then she accepted and she didn't eat it. And Rashi says this, Shat pasak hu'uber mitavasai. The Uber stopped having his taiva. In other words, by talking to the lady, you somehow got the Uber to not have his taiva, and then, which implies that it's nothing to do with whether she did the issur or she didn't do the issur. We're sort of like not talking to her. We're trying to get the kid, there's no sakanah to the child if he eats it. He doesn't care if he has it, he's getting his nutrition from his mother. So the kid is pushing the mother into eating it, and if the kid chooses to force the mother to eat on Yom Kippur, so to speak, then the kid, there's something wrong with that kid. Now, the kid is not doing any issur by doing that. Okay? But there's something wrong with him. And that's also the way to read the Gemara then. The Gemara brings a raya, brings psukim to describe what's wrong with this. And the Gemara is like this. One pasuk is about Yirmiyahu. It says, B'terem et tzarcha b'betem yidaticha. Okay? The Rebbe Shalom says about Yirmiyahu, you should know, before you were hatched, before you were put into your mother's stomach, I already had plans for you. Okay? I already had big plans for you. In other words, nothing to do with what you did. The person had a special neshama that he put into there. Okay, so in other words, the other pasuk is Zoru Rishar Merechem, that the Risharim are already off Merechem, from before they were born. That is to say, this was a good neshama, this was a bad neshama, whatever that means, whatever that's supposed to mean. So the point is, if you could talk to the mother and get her to not eat, that is indicative that the kid was be'etzem a good kid. But if you can't convince her, then it was be'etzem a bad neshama. It's not that the eating itself causes the Timtum. The Gemara doesn't say anything about Timtum. That's the truth. There's no Timtum over here. It's indicative, when you convince her or not, is indicative of what kind of neshama is inside there. What is it, a better or worse kid? And you see that as it plays out, and eventually is that this one was a good guy and this kid was a rotten apple. And that played out what you saw later on. But it's not that this is causing it, but this is just a simon of what's going on. Okay? On the other hand, I will tell you, there is a rule, it's in Hilchos Yom Kippur, right by this din, brings this Gemara. He also brings the Yerushalmi about Acher. Okay, we'll talk about that next time. But the Yerushalmi about Acher, whose mother ate avodah zarah. She ate food from an avodah zarah, and the Gemara, the impression of the Yerushalmi is that it caused it. Not that the fact that she had to eat it showed that Acher was a bad neshama from the beginning, but that the eating of it actually caused him to go off. Okay, that's the mashmois, and the Aruch implies that these two Gemaras saying, the Gemara here, the Gemara Newman, and the Yerushalmi are saying the same thing, as if to say, which is like the Rukusabosm, that it's not because that we see that the kid was bad, but that doing the wrong thing led the kid down the wrong path. Okay, and Eretz Hashem, as you said, we're going to find out next time that this whole thing is very strange, because we keep talking about it as relates to Isser, we keep talking about it as relates to eating Isurim, eating tray food. And I'm even talking about whether it applies to Isurim that happen on Yom Kippur, just it's like that. And we're going to find the next time that's not at all Pasha. Okay? The good reason to think that has nothing to do with Machal Sasuras at all. It has to do with Isser Beheter rather than. Okay? But I'm that's for next time. Okay.